Hello, this is Joe Melky with Fabrications for Certiflat Weldtables. In this video, we're going to look at the components and assembly of a Certiflat 2-foot by 4-foot fab block. Upon receiving your fab block, the first thing you want to do is take a look at the bill of materials and compare all of the components with the components that you've received to make sure that you have all of the components necessary to start this assembly. Now, the first component to the fab block we're going to look at is the tabletop surface itself. Now, as it comes to you, there isn't a top or a bottom to this plate, but what we do want to look for is we want to look for a crown, meaning that if there is a high spot in the center of the table. With a straight edge, we can check for that, and there isn't a noticeable crown in this plate, so it doesn't really matter which surface is the top or the bottom. I chose the side that I wanted to be the top of my table, and it is currently facing down. I have positioned the top on top of these two 2x4s. We're actually not concerned about the flatness of the table that we're working on. I happen to be working on a pro table, but you could do this on a metal bench, a wood bench, a couple 2x4s across sawhorses, anything of that nature will be fine for the assembly of this table. So I've got this up on the 2x4s, and that's so I can work around it, and also because I want to be able to use the internal structure of the table to draw the tabletop flat. The internal structure is what makes these tables flat. We're not worried about the surface we're assembling on. So again, just get this resting up on a couple 2x4s, whether it's on a tabletop or on a set of sawhorses, and then we'll start to assemble the inner structure. That inner structure consists of long support ribs and short support ribs. On the 2-foot by 4-foot table, that consists of 2 of these long support ribs that have a tab and slot construction that interconnects with the tabletop its surface, just like this. And this table has 5 short support ribs that intersect the table the short way. So these components will only go together one way, intersecting like I've shown you here. I'll assemble all of these support ribs, and then we'll go to how we want to clamp these support ribs to the table to make the table flat. Now, depending on the size table you've purchased, you may have more or less support ribs than this table does, but generally they all still assemble the same. Now, the assembly of the internal structure of a fab block should be just that easy. Basically, all these components should literally fall together. And the tabs on the ribs intersect the plate, and the cross sections align themselves properly. If by chance a part is hanging up, you might want to check for maybe a burr from the cutting process or something like that. Now, we talked about looking for a crown in the tabletop. If this tabletop had a crown or a high spot, I would have wanted that high spot facing down right now, so it would have been the top of the table surface. The reason we do that is if there's a high spot, it's easier for us to draw the high spot in at the center rather than the other way around if the high spot was facing into the support structure, trying to pull the sides down. If you didn't have a straight edge or you didn't check before, an easy way to look for a high and low spot is with a pen light. With a pen light, I can shine that behind these support ribs and look to see if there's any light shining between the support ribs and the table surface itself. Now, right now, everything appears to be fitting close to the table surface, which tells me that the tabletop itself is pretty flat and true as it is right now. So I don't have any concerns with assembly. If I saw gaps On the sides of the table, I would want to turn the plate top over, and then the reverse would be true. I would see light shining through the center, and my crown would be down, and I would be able to draw the tabletop flat against the inner structure with the clamps that I use. So with everything set up here, I'm happy with the way it's all sitting. Everything appears to be flat and fitting firmly against one another. So what we'll go to next is how we're going to clamp this all together before we lay in some tack welds. Now when it comes to clamping this inner structure to the tabletop, there's several methods of how you can do this. If I had actual fixture table clamps, I could drop those clamps into a fixture hole and clamp them down on the intersections to draw the table and the support structure together. If I had deep jaw C-clamps or deep jaw vice clamps, I could use those. But the simplest and probably most economical way I've found to do this is with U-bolts. Now the hole pattern, the holes are 2 inches on center. So I use 2-inch by 3-inch U-bolts, and those can drop in right over these support ribs into the holes, just like that. And I can put those on each of these support ribs to clamp the table surface down. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to work on the interior part of the table and clamp that all down. Then what I'll do is, if I believe everything is flat and tight against the support structure, I'm going to lay a couple tack welds in throughout here just to hold it all together. Then I'll flip the table over. I will put a straight edge on it and check to make sure everything is flat. If I'm happy with that, I'll be able to start laying some tack welds into the tabs on the tabletop surface itself. So that's where we're at next. I'll start putting in these clamps and we'll catch up with you later. Now after clamping the components together with the U-bolts, I laid a few tack welds on the inside just to hold all the pieces together. Flip the table over so I can check it with a straight edge, and checking it lengthwise, the short way, and a little bit diagonally across the table. I can see that the table is flat, which is obviously exactly where we want to be. From using the bolts to draw the tabletop down against the inner support ribs has created a flat surface. So now what I'm going to do is, for every tab that I've got in the tabletop, I'm just going to put a tack weld to hold it together. After those tack welds are in, I'll end up flipping the table back over again and work on assembling the side skirts next. next step for us is to get the side plates to the table clamped into position and tack welded the same way that we did the table top. To clamp them into place, to get the long sides in place, I'm going to run some 1/2-inch threaded rod through the table to clamp them in place, and the long way, to get the ends in place, I'll use some long bar clamps, just to show you two different methods. Now you could, if you have a lot of bar clamps, you could use all bar clamps to clamp this together. If you have no bar clamps, you could use all threaded rod to clamp it together, but I'll just show you both ways. With the threaded rod and bar clamps, we've effectively drawn all 4 sides into the internal structure of the fab block. The same way the internal structure makes the tabletop flat, that structure also makes the sides flat and square to one another. With that being said, we don't want to over tighten any of our clamps. This is 1/4-inch plate. We don't want to draw clamping mechanisms so tight that we distort or flex the sides. All we want to do is draw the plates in flat against the internal structure and the corners in square with one another, and the internal structure does that for us. We don't have to concern ourselves too much with trying to square things up. If all the parts fit together correctly, it will square and flatten itself. So I'm confident that all the clamping I've done has squared and flattened everything. We can do a visual inspection of all the joints and just make sure that we don't have any large gaps or that there's something misaligned. You can usually feel on a joint if 2 plates aren't quite lining up. We can also go in with our pen light and just do an inspection of some mating surfaces, make sure that all of our surfaces are flat against one another, and I'm confident with the inspection that this table is ready to go. So our next step now is to put in tack welds in all the tab slots on the sides the same way we did on the top of the table, and after I've done that, we'll come back. tab and slot has been tack welded on both the top and all 4 sides. I've removed all the clamps and all the hardware holding everything together. Last thing that I have to do for the tabletop are the bottom corner plates that the leg kit affixed to, and those will go in the corners one way. They are made to go in one direction only. And if we did our job right, these should all be fairly snug and square. And that's just kind of the final thing that tells me that the table is completely square, that these 4 plates drop into place as they're supposed to. These have a tab and slot configuration all the way around, so I'm going to tack those all in and then come back and finish weld them. Then the last step will be to flip this table over and finish weld all the tab and slots on the top and the sides. The assembly of our fab block is complete, all components installed and fully welded, every tab fully welded. A quick check with our straight edge confirms that our block is still flat after all of the tabs have been welded. Now if you follow these basic instructions and take your time, your results should be the same. This table is essentially ready for use. It can be used on top of another work surface, or it can be used in conjunction with our Fabrications kit, which is the leg kit for a fab block. So if you did purchase the fab block, you'll want to watch the next video where we'll go through that basic assembly. I hope this video was informative. If you're new to weld tables and you're interested in a weld table, or if you have questions about your existing weld table, you can reach us at www.weldtables.com. Thanks for watching.